Advisory, Mark Whittle, and Principal of HR Research Group, Ray LaMotta. Mark and Ray, thanks so much to you both for joining us, and I'll now turn it over to you, Mark.
Wonderful. Thanks, Amanda. And pleasure to speak with you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, for this special webinar. We're going to be sharing today our global benchmark on what HR leaders, so all of you and your peers, are focused on for the coming year. Each year at Gartner, we survey hundreds of HR leaders to really find out what are they prioritizing, and we share it with you. And many of you will probably utilize this webinar, and you have in the past, and these results to serve as one input into your priorities and HR strategy for 2022. And we have a lot of folks on the line. We're expecting over a couple thousand. So thanks for joining. We really appreciate you deciding to spend 60 minutes with us today. And we do not take this investment lightly and hope to make it highly worthwhile. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Mark Whittle. I'm a Vice President in Research and Advisory at Gartner, where I've been for almost 15 years. I live outside of Washington, D.C., and in our minutes today, you're going to see that we're going to learn about what HR leaders say about their business trends for 2022, what their HR priorities are for next year, and then finally, very briefly, a few key action steps and recommendations for you on these. I'm joined today by my co-moderator, Ray LaMotta, who you see here. He's going to also help answer some questions in the Ask a Question tab. So as Amanda mentioned, pose a question in the Ask a Question tab if you want, but being realistic with everybody here, it's going to probably be hard to get a lot of questions, but certainly afterwards, we would love to chat with you or whoever your Gartner contact is, talk to them, but we would love to get more detail. As Amanda mentioned also, you can download this presentation, and Amanda just mentioned where you can do that on this deck, and at the end of our time today, she'll mention that again. Okay, well, let's get into this. And first thing I would like to talk about is that we need to understand that the survey this year must be interpreted through the lens of some significant challenges facing us as HR leaders this year, as if last year, 2020, wasn't enough. And it's perhaps hard to believe, but our challenges and unknowns might even be greater now than last year when we did this webinar. You know these well, like the ones you see on this page. You live these every day. Like on the left side, rising turnover and heightened war for talent. And it's not just those always hard to get tech and digital talent, but hourly workers, whether plants or distribution centers, or stores or restaurants. And then in the middle, the continued evidence of employee burnout. Workloads are not getting back to normal, probably never will. It's interesting that, at the beginning of the pandemic and probably for the first year of 2020, we kept telling our employees, like, don't worry, just keep working hard. I know you're working a lot, but the workload is going to calm down. We're going to get back to normal. And now we're realizing at this point that workloads probably will never go down. And that is something we're grappling with. So this issue of resilience and burnout is still a major issue. And then finally, on the right, the new COVID spike impacting hybrid rollout plans and messing with our talent planning. In fact, our recent polling data shows that fully 66% of companies have delayed their office reopening plans. The Delta variant arrived at just the right time to break our spirits. We thought maybe by this time we wouldn't be in this position, but we're still here. Many of our employees are still here. Fortunately, cases seem to have peaked and they're declining in some geographies, so let's hope that continues. But we've all chosen this field, the human capital field. It's the people business, and the people business is messy and stressful, especially at times like this, new unwelcome surprises every day. But our calling really as HR leaders is beautiful too, because it's our role as HR leaders to touch the human spirit of our employees and bring meaning and value and dignity to the work that they do every day. Certainly the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 was very focused on financial side and really elevated the role of CFOs. This year in the pandemic and last year have elevated the role of the CHRO for sure. I don't know, one of my favorite human interest stories, and I'll just share it really briefly from this past year during the Tokyo Olympics, was from the Jamaican gold medalist in the 100-meter hurdles named Hansel parchment. And if you didn't see that human interest story, very interesting. I meant to have a slide here showing that. But Hansel Parchment, just before the gold medal race on the 100-meter hurdles, he took the wrong bus from the Olympic Village and ended up in the aquatic center instead of the track and field. And he didn't know what to do. And he talked to the Olympic officials there, and they basically said, dude, the only way for you to get back in time is you need to get back on that shuttle back to the Olympic Village and get on the correct bus. He wasn't going to have time to make his race. And a nice volunteer, she saw his predicament and helped him get into a taxi and made sure the taxi driver knew where he was going and gave him taxi ride money. Anyways, he goes, he wins the race, and he comes back 2 days later, and you can see this on YouTube. He tracks it, and he tracks it. He goes back. He repeats his route, takes the bus back to the aquatic center, finds this nice woman, and you can hear it. I'm like, hey, do you remember me? And she's like, yeah, hi. He hands her his gold medal, and she's just wide-eyed. You won this? And he gives her a Jamaican flag. He pays her back the money. And it was just a really great human interest story. But the importance of, yes, his goal was to win the gold medal, but he didn't forget the people that helped him there. So just a reminder about the importance of what we do every day and the people element. And it's not just us who know this. Our CEOs and leaders also are seeing the importance of our role. And you can see here one example quote about CEOs leaning on CHROs and HR leaders more than ever. So would like in this first one, first poll for you, we would like to hear from you. Are your senior business leaders taking more responsibility for talent-related issues over the past year or not? So there's a poll here, and I think Amanda or Ray let me know where they might be able to see it on the right perhaps, but let's answer this first one and see, are your business leaders taking more responsibility for talent-related issues over the past year?
Yeah, I have some instructions for you. So as Mark said, our poll is now open and we do want to know what you're thinking. So the voting section is located under the webinar player. You can select your answer there and then you will see the results. And once the poll is closed, everyone will see the final results. And just a quick reminder to please continue to ask your questions and comments in the Ask a Questions tab.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so I'm starting to see some comments here. I'm seeing 35% or so strongly agree, 47% agree, and actually not too many who are saying disagree. This is great news, and I hope you realize this is great news. We're seeing 3/4 of you saying that you're agreeing or strongly agreeing. That's important because a few years ago, this would not have been the case. I speak with clients all over the world, and one of our biggest struggle is getting leaders to be accountable and take responsibility for talent-related issues. And so that's great news. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to start with a short section on what are the business priorities, because before defining our HR priorities and strategy, we should first understand what the business is trying to do. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time in that middle section and then end with a very short, a few HR trends and what Gartner is going to be focused on next year. A couple really interesting research studies that I want to point out. So let's get started and talk about business priorities. And you likely first will be interested in knowing, before we get started, who the participants are in this survey that we did very recently. So you can see here that we surveyed at the bottom left on the N almost 600 HR leaders, and they were across 60 countries and all major industries. About 40%, 39% were chief human resource officers, and then you can see the mix of other HR leaders who participated in this. And this is a survey we do at this time every year to find out what are you going to be working on next year. And when we look at the business transformation, what is the first thing we see? Well, we asked these 600 HR leaders to select their top 3 business priorities. And you can see here the ones that garnered the most are improve operational excellence, execute business transformations, grow the business. The percentages here represent how many HR leaders selected this particular one as one of their top business priorities. So for example, the first one, improve operational excellence, it means that 66% of HR leaders selected this one as one of their business's top priorities. On the right, you can see how these priorities have changed since our survey 1 year ago at the end of 2020, when businesses were contemplating what to focus on in 2021. And the biggest changes that we've been are in the second one here, execute business transformations, where this priority is 11% higher than 1 year ago. Automation, companies are planning transformations, perhaps technology, digitalization, automation, agile HR. You can also see farther down that optimized costs is 17% lower for 2022 than what companies were planning 1 year ago. 1 year ago, more of our companies were focused on cost reductions, worried about our business, but those fears have reduced now. Many of us are realizing, hey, our businesses are actually doing okay. We've already done a lot of cost cutting. Maybe we're not as afraid of the future as before. Okay, let's turn and look at our HR priorities now. These are the top 10 initiatives selected by HR leaders for 2022. And I'll let you look at them for a minute, but a bit on the methodology. HR leaders were presented with a total of 14 key initiatives and allowed to select up to 6. But on average, each survey respondent chose their top 4. So, for example, the 59% of HR leaders selecting building critical skills and competencies as one of their top initiatives to support their organizational priorities. So 59% would have chosen this as one of their top 4. That was the one selected far and away most frequently. This is followed by, as you can see, organizational design and change management, current and future leadership bench, future of work, and DEI. So for those of you who maybe listened to this similar webinar last year at the end of 2020, you might notice that a lot of these priorities remain similar to ones last year and even the year before that, 2019. It's true. In fact, the top 4 remain exactly the same, but DEI and employee experience swapped position this year. Both recruiting and technology moved up 1 spot compared to last year, while performance management moved down. And remember, there are 14 here. We're just putting the top 10. So the top ones have largely stayed the same. HR continues focusing on these because they remain big challenges for us. But while the priorities haven't changed too much since last year, some of the specific challenges and context within these priorities have changed. And the lens through which we look at them has now changed. No longer a COVID lens, but we find ourselves in an uncomfortable COVID purgatory lens, Dante's Inferno lens that makes us appreciate these HR priorities and address them in a different way. I do see, okay, so when you think about it, all these priorities are really undergirded by future of work concerns or considerations, a truncated future or a time warp that's maybe thrust us into the future now. So some of you may be asking, well, how does this differ by geography or maybe by industry? And we've actually got those answers. In fact, if you look here, we've got some of the global regions represented, and my apologies that we don't have Middle East or Africa, and we've brutishly lumped ANZ in with APAC, but for each region on this page, we've bolded in blue text those that stand out as highest in the geography, and red bold text for those that are stand out as lowest among the geographies. In the first column, APAC is prioritizing building critical skills and competencies much more than other geographies. And under the 5th priority, DEI, there's an interesting and significant gap between LATAM, which lists the topic as a low priority, and North America, which prioritizes it highest among the regions. But conversely, LATAM prioritizing performance management much higher than other regions. Let's look at some differences by industry. Then I'll try to answer a couple of questions that we see here. But we have 2 pages of industries. Here are 4, and we have 5 more on the next page. So I'll let you briefly look over this. Look at healthcare, for example, really prioritizing technology right now. Retail and financial services putting more emphasis on future work. Financial services seems a bit more content with their current and future leadership bench than other industries. And maybe you find yourself on this one. There's a few more industries for you to consider. I see a few questions here. What do you define as critical skills? Are they foundational skills for change readiness or job-specific technical skills? So as we think about critical skills, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But yeah, critical skills could be a skill that's really important to our organization, or is a particular skill that's hard to find and attract, or one that just takes a long time to build. Maybe it's something different. So that's how we define critical skill. What is the average company size of employees that participated in the survey? It really was the average companies. It was a mix. Most of the companies that we work for tend to be mid-sized to all the way to Fortune 500, probably weighted on the mid to bigger side of companies. And future of work, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I know there's some questions about this as well. And yes, the survey was taken. The survey was taken right when inflation really started rising. So it's possible you're right. Cost reduction might have been higher. Okay, well, let's keep going then. And what we're going to do now in the rest of our time is spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these top 5. And what we're going to do is talk about, first of all, the challenges that HR leaders have said are taking place with each one of these 5. And then we're going to give very briefly a few of Gartner's latest insights on each of these and 1 or 2 best practices. So that's how we're going to spend the rest of the time that we have. So let's get started with the first one. And the first one is about critical skills and competencies. And the most frequent problems that HR leaders mention regarding building critical skills and competencies, the top one, as you can see here, with 47% of HR leaders mentioning as one of their top concerns, is we don't know what skill gaps our employees have. The second is we can't develop skill development solutions fast enough before things change. And then we don't have the skills and we don't have a skill development culture. So which is yours? Good rhetorical question for you. What are the main challenges you're having with building critical skills and competencies? Let me share a few trends and insights from Gartner's latest research around this. Some of you may recall that at Gartner we've been tracking changing skills for a number of years. The trends continue to hold, which is this. As you can see on the left, the average number of skills for given roles has been growing by 6.3% each year since 2018. This data comes from millions of job descriptions from our Gartner's Talent Neuron data, which you can see on the bottom left, and it's the average number of skills for IT, finance, and sales roles in the United States. And this is just an example, but the same would have applied with other roles in other regions. So in 2018, these roles had an average of 13.1 skills per job, and today it's almost 16. And not only is the number of average skills going up, but some of our skills our employees have are going away. They're being replaced by different skills. Look at the chart on the right. Nearly 1 in 3 skills I needed in 2018 are no longer needed now. So I need to learn as an employee new skills to replace the ones that went away. Plus, I've got more skills piled on. No wonder we as HR leaders are having trouble getting a handle on what our employee skill gaps are and feeling that we can't develop skill development solutions fast enough. One of the reasons that we struggle with building critical skills is because our skills data is not well organized. In fact, our skills data is often not standardized. It's stored across a highly fragmented landscape of systems supporting learning, administrative HR, recruiting, workforce planning, workforce management, project management, and collaboration. They all may be storing and using completely different skills data. In some organizations, maybe your skills data doesn't exist anywhere in any system. And such skill fragmentation really creates big problems for us. So if you think about it, if you've got this sort of kind of siloed and fragmentation of skills, the problems that it creates are things like driving up our technology costs because of redundant skills data and infrastructure. We waste time arriving at the same insights, or simply insights are not shared across silos, or they might be inconsistent. We often overlook cross-cutting opportunities and skill solutions. So what should we do? Well, our Gartner research demonstrates the need for a skills-based talent management strategy. And that's what you see depicted here. Skills-based organizations structure their talent strategies around skills. Note that it's not structured around roles, but around skills, which results in a more adaptable workforce. And by adaptable, we mean that such an approach improves the development of skills faster and better. It improves internal mobility and career progression. This skills-based talent management approach, rather than role-based approach, is definitely a game changer. I was just speaking 2 weeks ago, for example, with a major fast food chain that's very progressive in their talent management strategies, and they're really focused on this right now for their corporate staff. Another client I spoke to just a few days ago refers to skills as a currency. in their organization, a currency that helps employees develop and move across the organization and get them focused rather on what's my next role, what's my next promotion, what is the next skill that I need to develop or experience. Let me briefly share with you another example from software company Workday. Here we have Workday's plan to embed skills centricity in all talent management processes. This is what they call a skills-first talent management. And like many of us, Workday's been experiencing dual pressures. First, the COVID pandemic underscoring the pre-existing need for more skills agility to solve a dynamic set of business challenges. And second, they were facing that like many of us, employees want to explore interests and they want to build their skills portfolio to grow their career opportunities. And not just with us. They might be interested in really how do I develop into the whatever career I want, whether with this company or another one. And the key is that this is a journey. And Workday's created a multi-year strategy that will impact every talent management process. By assessing each phase of the talent lifecycle, they plan to redesign systems and remove barriers where necessary to really promote this system, a system-wide uptake of the skills-based approach. On this page, you can see the talent management lifecycle starting at the top left, like recruit and onboard, and how they're hyper-focused on this activity in ensuring that they're filtering candidates for the critical skills most needed by Workday. So not looking so much for well-rounded candidates who check a bunch of boxes, but zeroing in on skills centricity. And then look at the next activity, reward and pay. They've revamped their compensation to double down on differentiating pay for critical skills an employee has. In fact, they've broken skills into 3 categories, which is not listed here, but they've broken into core skills required for any employee to be successful at the company, job, which are skills proficiency required for a particular part of the business, and unique skills. Those are skills above and beyond those needed for a particular role. And Workday ensures pay is competitive and attractive for these skills, not just the position. So this page shows the approach to a skills taxonomy that allows Workday to capture the complete skill set of every employee and for the collective workforce. And so employees can then be developed and deployed based on their skills and experiences, not a role that they've held. Same goes for other life cycle ones, which is what you see here. They actually call it skills centricity momentum. And here you can see one example of their careers and mobility. I won't go into much detail, but you'll be able to get this and download this presentation. But they already have an existing careers program that's an encouraged part of the organization's culture. They have skills data for 3/4 of their workforce, and they work with employees to understand their career and mobility interests, but defined around skills and experiences they want and need rather than what's my next role. And they take into account the employee's interest and also try to align and encourage employees to develop those skills that the organization needs more of. You can see on the very right that they use this to radically improve talent deployment across the organization, where the employee senses increased mobility and where the organization optimizes the skills deployment they most need. Another example is in recruiting, in onboarding, which I already spoke about. But again, this is a great way for them to gather and implement skills data as they're planning to increase their headcount by 20% this year. So as they bring new employees into the organization, they have an opportunity to immediately capture information on their current skills and the aspirations they have, and they feed this data into their careers process. So putting skills at the heart of this recruiting and onboarding initiative is an opportunity, and one that can feed into and benefit certainly additional talent management processes. So embedding skills in our talent management process is our ultimate goal. And one of the steps to get there is that we need to train leaders and managers to focus on skills, not just roles. Here's one example from Unilever. And Unilever, who did just that, and they really train leaders to focus on skills rather than roles. We've shown this Unilever best practice last year, so it might be familiar for a few of you, but Unilever arranged a boot camp, a Be Resourceful boot camp, to bring together groups of managers, leaders, and HRBPs for an intensive one-day course to learn about how to leverage non-traditional talent sources. It's what they call the open talent economy, or OTE. And part of leveraging these talent sources is focus on staffing projects based on the skills they need to complete them. So before, like most of us, Unilever previously divided work among FTEs according to their job descriptions. Managers do think in terms of people, of roles, not skills. But to tap into different types of talent across the spectrum of what they call this open talent economy, managers needed more precise information about what skills are given or required for a given project. And so to get a better sense of the talent needs, on the right in number 1 here, Unilever helps leaders break large projects into bite-sized tasks. And in number 2 there, uncovering the underlying skills needed to accomplish them. And then the bootcamp teaches them piece number 3, which is thinking about needs in terms of skills instead of people, really empowers leaders to identify and fulfill talent in a more holistic way. So this allows them to look more innovatively, like maybe contingent workers, like freelancers or contract workers if possible. Okay. Let's go to our second one, but I'm going to see if there's some questions here. I see a few questions that I'll answer before we move on. How do you transition the organization to focus on skills versus role? Very good question. The first thing we need to do is to, like Unilever here, is to help managers and leaders start thinking about what skills do I need to acquire or need, rather than thinking about, oh, I need 3 more people. But breaking it into, oh, what I really need is more of these skills. And that allows me to be more innovative. Maybe I can borrow skills from other parts of the organization on projects, or have them come in to do particular projects, or maybe work with me on a part-time basis, or transfer. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Or maybe I can rethink our role designs to get rid of the things that that person who has critical skills doesn't need to do that somebody else could do, so that I can enable the supply of those skills. The other one is to really focus employees on careers and development, not focused on promotions and roles, but rather what are the skills and experiences I need to get me prepared for the role that I eventually want, or the career I want, whether with this company or another one. So more on that. Is there a breakdown of which skills are becoming needed and which are going away by industry? I believe we do have some of that data. I don't have that now, but that would be that's something that we do track some of that. So let us know, and I think that comes from some of our talent neuron data. All right, thank you for those. Let's go to the next priority. So the next priority is organizational design and change management. As we are doing with every priority, let's start by showing the challenges that HR leaders have with this priority. Far and away, the biggest challenge HR leaders report with org design and change management is our employees are fatigued from all the change. So what's new, right? We've been saying that for years. Our employees have been saying that for years. Maybe what's new here is how much bigger of a problem this seems to be compared to the last few years, even last year. This year, over half of you mentioned this as a significant challenge, 54%. Last year, it was only 36%. Maybe we finally are really hearing our employees when they say they're fatigued. The next challenges on this page simply illustrate our helplessness against fixing change fatigue. Our leaders and managers are bad at change. We in HR are bad at change. You look at this and you go, how is this even possible? We've been trying to manage change for years. How could we possibly be this bad? How can we not have improved? I'll tell you why we haven't improved and why change management continues to be problematic. The answer lies in the fact that many of us don't understand the complexities of change and how to wrap our heads around the problem. We must start by understanding change fatigue, which is the first and biggest challenge that HR leaders have set on this page. What is change fatigue? You can see in the blue box up the top that Gartner defines change fatigue as negative employee responses to organizational change that harms outcomes. Notice that it's not just they're tired, but that the tiredness leads to negative responses to org change that result in not achieving something we need as an organization. You can see at the bottom of this page the 3 principal negative employee responses to change that hurt organizational outcome. Apathy. I just don't care. This new way of doing things is not going to make a difference. Frustration. Too many changes too fast. And burnout. The changes have been so exhausting, I don't have energy for my job. I just can't recharge like before. I'm running a deficit. And worse, change load is not just about the volume of change. Volume is just one kind of change fatigue. So too, many different changes coming at the employee. It can also be about the level of exertion required to make a change. Some things just take more energy to get them done than others. And finally, it can be about how disruptive a particular change is. And your employee may be facing all 3 of these. One more fascinating insight from our change fatigue research here at Gartner is that small day-to-day changes are more fatiguing than big changes. Big changes, which you can see above the water surface, represent only 4% of changes. Things like acquiring a new company or a major systems upgrade. But below the surface, this is where 96% of our employees feel changes every day. Small changes like a new teammate added to the team, or a teammate leaving the company or laid off, new job responsibility that are given to me, or a small change in a process or small technology upgrade. And notice that the red box at the bottom, small changes have 2.5 times the impact on employee change load than big transformational changes. The reason is because there are so many of them, the effect is cumulative. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And if you think about it, this red box of 2.5 times makes sense because those big changes, we all experience it together. We're all in it. But the small changes happen to me personally. And I may react to them or sense them differently than you. Let me show you how one company, Medtronic, has recognized the damage of these small day-to-day changes and is doing something about it by helping managers out. Medtronic is a large medical devices company, and they've created a way to measure the impact of small changes through observable leading indicators. They start with subjective measures, which you can see at the top left. What might that be? Well, like increased instances of an employee feeling overwhelmed or concerned. And on the top right, a manager might notice declining performance or work quality, or an employee appearing stressed all the time, or no longer turning on the camera at virtual meetings, or frequently in a bad or negative mood. And then on the bottom left, these are the objective measures, which Medtronic lists 2 behavioral changes that might signal potential small change impact. Decrease in discretionary effort, meaning kind of their performance. Do they show up and give 100%? Their network contributions. And the specific indicators they prompt managers to watch for is things like whether the employee's helping teammates less, maybe they're not volunteering as much for projects, maybe they're no longer proposing new ideas. By the way, it's a big red flag if your employees stop offering new ideas to improve stuff. And then on the right, they ask team managers to track the number of these subjective and objective behaviors and write them into a tracking document to identify early warning signs and be able to address them. To let their HRBPs know so they can start looking and sensing, getting an early warning of things. We don't have time to see all this best practice, but I'm just showing you one example. We've got the whole best practice, but I'm just showing this one page. And by the way, all the things that I share with you here are best practice. I'm just showing a few insights, but our best practices usually tend to be about 8 or 10 pages, and we go into more detail about what they're doing. So recall in the previous slide that we saw the iceberg image of how day-to-day small changes are more prevalent and damaging than large transformational ones. Well, what should we do to combat the cumulative effect of small changes on fatigue? There are 2 things that help employees absorb change. Trust, which is at the top of this page, trust in their managers, in their teammates, trust in their leaders, and that the organization has their best interests in mind in everything they do. And you can see in the upper right that employees that have high trust have 2.6 times the capacity to absorb change. And then at the bottom of this page, the second key to combating the cumulative effects of fatiguing small changes is team cohesiveness. And not broader big networks, but in the small immediate team. And employees who have high team cohesiveness have almost 2 times the capacity to absorb change. If a team works well together, cares for each other, listens and takes care of each other, this team is going to be much better prepared to handle the continuous day-to-day changes in a way that are less draining. We don't have time to go into a lot of examples or insights, but I do want to show a couple examples of this. But for all of these insights and practices, please know that we'd love to speak in a more personalized way. But let's see a few examples around trust and team cohesiveness. Just checking here that everything's okay, Amanda and Ray, from a question standpoint or from my volume standpoint. All right, interrupt if something's, yeah. Ray, all good?
All good, Mark. Sounds great.
Okay, great, wonderful. So as I mentioned, let's see a few examples. I want to start with a case that we profiled this year in our workforce resilience study. And this is a company called Hilti. Hilti is a manufacturer based in Europe. They're based in Liechtenstein. They have like 30,000 employees. and you're wondering how they can have 30,000 based in Liechtenstein, but that's the case, but they're based in Europe. But while many of us try to fix employee burnout and fatigue at the individual level, so things like, hey, I know you're burned out, you're stressed, here's some mental or emotional resources that you can take advantage of. So many of us try to address this at the individual level. Maybe we give employees more time off or enhance mental and emotional well-being. Hilti realized that these stressors often are best managed not by a person, but by the team. And I am going to, before I get into this, just going to answer a couple questions. I see one. Could the difference in, let me just go back to this one before showing that, but could the difference in impact of small changes versus large changes also be due to less time spent on communication, rollout, training related to small changes? That is true. I think that is a fair assessment. And that is probably why we spend much more time on the big transformational ones, and they affect us all, and the little ones we're just not aware of. And then another question, are we referring to an employee trust toward the company or the employee trust toward the employee? It's the employee's trust toward the company. So how much trust do they feel in our organization, in their manager? Good questions. All right, so let's get on with Hilti here. As I mentioned, they're a manufacturer, but they found that the stressors are best managed not by a person, but by the team. What we're looking at here is a photo from their central session in the workshop. Employees are asked to do some self-reflection before the workshop on their own individual work barriers and stressors and fatiguing changes. During the workshop, as you can see here, each person writes each barrier and stressor on a Post-it note and places the Post-it note on the bullseye according to where it happens. The concentric circles you see there, each represents a level. The stressor could be one that's generated by me at the individual level. Things like, I don't know, I need more time for personal development. I need to pick up my kids every day at 3 p.m. And that's when the email traffic really gets going from the West Coast. Is it generated at the team level? Maybe our new process for doing this slows my projects down, or it could be at the organizational level or external pressures. And what this does is it enables the group together to see what's weighing on people, what their priorities are, and where the source of those pressures are. If someone is challenged by something that another team member can help with or solve, that comes out. If there's a lot of common pressure at the team level, the question becomes, how can we as a team better cope with this pressure? If it's at the organizational level, the senior leader here who's facilitating helps them understand what can we change, what's not going to change due to higher enterprise level constraints, things that won't change. So instead, we need to figure out a way to cope. But this is a great best practice on the team cohesiveness, and there has to be trust for this to work well. But again, the emphasis that if you want to handle the change fatigue, we need to help our employees absorb change, and the best way is done at the team level like this. Okay, let's move to our third priority. The third one has to do with current and future leadership bench. As always, let's first look at what are the specific challenges that HR leaders mention regarding current and future leadership bench. You can see that the biggest problem HR leaders state is that our leadership bench is not diverse. However, in this section, we're not going to focus on this topic since DEI is something that we'll address briefly in the fifth priority. Instead, for these next pages, we're going to focus on the second and fourth problems identified here by HR leaders, the challenge of effectively developing mid-level and line managers. And I speak with lots of clients all over the world. We do a great HR score benchmark to find out maturity levels and importance and where should priorities be. And I can tell you that developing managers and leaders continues to be a high priority. As you can see, this is the third most mentioned one. This is a big deal. And it's not a new challenge. There's been lots of ink spilled over the years in how to improve the quality of our managers and how to get them to develop and lead high-performing teams. And one of the most frequently mentioned reasons employees leave, particularly in hourly employees in retail and manufacturing and warehousing jobs, is poor manager quality. But all manager roles are in need of better development. And given the context of today, late 2021, what good looks like for a manager has changed. And good manager development has changed too. For example, we all recognize the increased importance of human empathy today. You've likely seen it from Gartner's new EVP, the Human Deal, in our work on the hybrid workforce. One company that we profiled this year that's been working on improving manager involvement in employee well-being is a company called early value. Early value, it's actually a pseudonym. Sometimes in Gartner we get organizations that say, hey, you can profile us and have our best practice, but please don't use our name, or it's just simply caught up in their legal department. They haven't released it. But early value is a small 1,000 employee services company that provides managers with clear guardrails and coaching around their team's mental and emotional well-being. And they found that managers often don't know how or what to say. You can see on this page that early value is identified the full spectrum of the types of responses their managers will give to employees. So on the left, they found that a lot of managers are under-involved, and they don't express concern for a team member's well-being, or they simply dismiss issues raised by employees, or they limit conversations with employees only to professional interactions. And then on the far right, they have other managers who get over-involved. They start entering the territory of a mental health counselor. Early value doesn't want either of these extremes, so they train their managers to find the sweet spots in the middle, those middle three green actions, like training them to schedule time to build a personal connection so they can notice a change in behavior, and how to monitor early warning signs of mental distress, like maybe a decline in motivation or productivity, something similar to the indicators we saw with Medtronic earlier. And then finally, early value trains managers on how to guide employees to well-being resources, because what early value actually wants to do is change the conversation they're having with employees. From the conventional approach on the left, where the manager mostly waits for the employee to proactively say something, doesn't usually happen a whole lot unless there's a lot of trust and empathy. And they're trying to get their manager to train them to be on the right side, where the manager senses and reaches out proactively. Let me share another example of a company that's developing managers in a great way today around hybrid work models and return to office. Rentokil is a professional services company, and their HR function actively looks for managers that seem to be performing very well in their new flexible environment to try to identify best practices to share with other managers. You can see at the top that they use surveys, that they survey their managers. This is not employee. This is a survey, pull surveys to their managers to identify, what's hard and difficult and challenging when leading virtually or leading today in a hybrid environment. And then in the middle here, the HR function looks at business KPIs and metrics to find managers that seem to be performing really well. In this case, Owen is in the call center, and he's a manager there, and he's got some really high KPIs. And then they have an interview at the bottom. They ask those high-performing managers, in this case Owen, about what they're doing that's working particularly well, if they'd be willing to share their tips and practices with other managers. So it's a great development strategy that doesn't come from HR, doesn't require extensive curriculum development. You probably have some examples already. Let's see one final example of a company that's taking an innovative approach to leader development today. This comes from Cargill, a global grains and agricultural commodities company. Cargill recognized that their leadership development program, which had not been adapted in 15 years, needed to be changed. Like all of us, Cargill faced a number of situational changes, which you can see on the left. And then on the right, they realized their out-of-date leadership development program just wouldn't do. Their old program focused on personal leadership development at a very individual and reflective level. This program was super costly. It didn't address all the emerging gaps and skills they needed that Cargill saw was playing out in the outside business world and their internal organization. So they scratched it. They came up with a new leader development program they called Catalyst, which is an ongoing experience that would bring leaders together to collectively learn big topics and shape the way forward. Catalyst experience is not meant to see as a program, but rather as a part of leaders' continuous learning journey. You can see on the left in the white box that these Catalyst experiences are targeted at all levels of leadership, including some 1,500 people at the very top. There's a company that has 160,000 employees, so really they're very top. In the middle column, titled Experiences, and there are 4 of them, this is the focus. And you can see the goals on the right. Cargill, like GE and other companies, realized that with very senior leaders, the best sort of training is not a curriculum. It's not, hey, go do this training, but rather in proposing challenges and new ideas and situations and experiences, so these senior leaders have time to reflect upon them, to talk about them. What are the implications for my leadership style and success that we need? This is what Cargill does here. Notice, too, that the last 2 experiences listed here involve continuing the leaders' learning and giving back to the cohort behind them. Let me share a few other details that Cargill is doing. At the top, they start with sharing external context and trends with these leaders. And you can see some of the illustrative ones here. And then on the right, what is the leader realization they want to achieve? In this external context, you can see in the top right that Cargill wants the leader to say, my role is impacted by broader shifts in the world. I'm not immune to change. And then in the middle, they contextualize to Cargill's context. And they want the leader to realize on his or her own that if I don't change, I'm going to be left behind and my business unit will suffer. And then finally, it's a focus on my individual context as a leader. And that the leader reflects and hopefully comes to the conclusion that they need to change. What got me here ain't going to get me there type of mentality. And again, we've got the full case on here, but some interesting way of how Cargill is approaching the getting leaders to think differently and change and develop in a different way. Okay, let's move to our fourth priority, future of work. What are the top problems that HR leaders are telling us regarding the future of work? The top one, our workforce planning is limited to headcount planning, a staffing plan basically. How much are we going to grow? How many employees do we expect to leave us and retire? And boom, we come up with a number. 49% say we don't have an explicit future of work strategy. And then a new one this year, our future of work strategy is only focused on hybrid or remote work. So we've made hybrid synonymous with future of work. What we're going to do today is give a few tips on how to create a great future of work strategy that can overcome these challenges here. And I know our time is brief, so I'll just share a few, but I know there were a couple of comments earlier about what is future of work. So let me first define what we think is future of work. Because the first thing to be able to craft one is to define it. And I think this is a great definition. I'll just read the first sentence. Future of work strategy is a set of initiatives to address the uncertainty and implications of future events that lead to changes in how, when, and where work gets done. And you can see that there's three processes to make this happen: trend analysis, scenario creation, and strategic planning. Let me share a few tips and guides on how to do each. In trends analysis, there are three steps. Identify trends. On the right, you can see that you should explore internal and external sources of trends and some examples. Then number two, interpret trends. And there are two recommended lenses: trends uncertainty, so probability of a trend happening, and trends impact on each other. And then number three, prioritize trends. Use some mechanism for prioritization. In a minute, I'm going to show you how NASA does this. Next phase, scenario creation. For any prioritized trend, like A and B here as examples, look at the red boxes on the right. You should first determine what are the range of possibilities, the potential uncertainties that could happen, and then combine these different future outcomes to create potential scenarios, as you see on the bottom. All right, just looking at a couple of the questions there. All right, but I'm going to keep going. And it might look, when you do this, which, by the way, we highly recommend that you think about maybe leveraging your strategy function in your organization. They have a lot of experience with putting together scenarios and trends analysis and doing it. So leverage them. It's a great way to test and improve your methodology and align with what your organization already uses. Okay, so what might it actually look like? Test your scenarios. At the top, what are the possible events that must or must not happen for each scenario to unfold? For example, you might say that the government must pass X legislation for us to pivot our business in this direction and thereby hire X many folks in this area with these skills. You can see at the bottom of this 2x2 where you map your various scenarios by degree of disruption and by probability of occurrence. And as I mentioned, a great way to improve this is to leverage your strategy group. And then in the final phase, you need to create your future of work strategic plan. Identify your initiatives by conducting a gap analysis of current business strategy and your future prioritized scenarios. This gap analysis is going to help you realize what initiatives need to be added or changed. And then number two, design and implement programs for each initiative. And number three, track the progress on each one. What metrics? How do we course correct where necessary? NASA is a great example, which I'll share. Let's see, I'm seeing a question here. What about employee experience tools like Viva? Do they help in enabling management with right tools for employee engagement? Maybe I'm not familiar with Viva necessarily. There's certainly some related to that. And this is one of those questions that probably goes more into the employee experience rather than future work, I think. But good question. We can talk offline about that. Thanks for that. So let me share, I was going to mention one example of NASA, which is doing a very interesting way to prepare for their future work. On the left, NASA starts with a bunch of trends to consider, like general trends, organization-specific trends, industry-specific trends, location-specific trends. Those are the different colored dots that you see on the left. And then in the middle, NASA uses 3 filters to analyze these trends. Filter 1 is longevity. Will this trend last beyond 1 to 2 years? Filter 2, is this trend important to our employees or our talent pool? And then filter 3, opportunity. Could this trend give us a talent advantage? Will it give us a competitive advantage? Then NASA categorizes the prioritized trends into themes to make them relevant and applicable. On the left, they start with the list of relevant future of work trends, which they obtained through the previous page with the 3 filters. And then on the right, they categorize these trends into themes, as you can see on the right. Note that at the bottom that NASA uses quantitative analysis. In this case, factor analysis to help reduce the large number of variables into fewer numbers that they can simplify. Okay, let's move on now to our 5th and final priority, which is DEI. What are the biggest challenges mentioned by HR leaders regarding DEI? Well, there was no clear winner, as our survey respondents were rather mixed across the top 4, with maybe the top one edging out the others by just a little bit. We struggle to hold business leaders accountable for DEI outcomes. You can see the next one down, employees see and experience DEI inconsistently. But we're going to focus on this first one, which is how to get business leaders to be accountable for DEI. And the first thing we see is a rise of pressure for organizations to make progress on DEI. At the top is pressure from CEOs and boards, for whom many have prioritized DEI as something they want to make progress on. There's also increasing legislation, too, that we've got to comply with. Pressure from employees who wish this to be a priority, and shareholders who want these companies that they invest in to make it a priority. And then customers might be looking for this as well. And while progress is being made, there's still less diversity in some leadership pipelines than desired. At the bottom of this pyramid are the frontline workers, where the statistics reveal that women and minorities are very strongly represented. As one moves up to mid-level and senior leaders, those percentages decline. And while there can be certainly several reasons that may explain these smaller percentages, the goal is to eliminate discrimination as one of the contributing factors. In some companies, as you see in the red text of the box, at the right, underrepresented talent can perceive slower rates of promotion or worse perception about their leadership potential. So how do we build accountability for leaders for championing underrepresented talent? Well, most companies today use collective accountability. Today's approach includes a focus on shifting mindsets toward prioritization of DEI initiatives, and then cascading goals to leaders, and then tracking metrics to see how the company's progressing. This leads to collective accountability, which can sometimes diffuse responsibility for DEI outcomes. Maybe I ride the coattails of the rest of the organization as a leader. A more pointed approach to drive the DEI outcomes desired is found in what can be called consequential accountability. And this approach involves, on the bottom left, providing objective criteria and data, and then customizing strategies for individual leaders to execute. And finally, expecting progress against these DEI goals if one is to be a leader in the organization. One company that's doing this is Altria, which is a tobacco and smoke-free alternatives company. They're doing some interesting things to transform leaders into DEI owners. Altria has taken a new approach that's different from conventional. On the left, instead of the usual top-down approach to creating and setting DEI goals for leaders, they co-create them with the leader to build consensus. And then, instead of communicating organizational goals without clarifying leader priorities, Altria creates a detailed leader scorecard, which I'll show you in a second. Third here, instead of restricting information and leader accessibility to the data, as we usually do, Altria fosters peer-to-peer transparency so leaders can see other leaders' data, and this reinforces DEI goals. And then finally, Instead of tacking on inclusion to leadership goals and competencies, as many of us do, Altria rates leader advocacy and establishes DEI requirements as a condition for progression. Now, this might not be the right strategy for every company, but it's an example of how one company is driving leadership accountability. Here's the scorecard they use. This is a sample scorecard for Bernadette, the CTO. It's a tool that helps track progress against the diversity and inclusion components. You can see at the top, it's a monitor of what employees in the IT function opine from survey questions broken down, so I can see it as my leader and see where I am and talk to my manager, my boss about that. But also I can see other leaders as well. And so I can see kind of where I stack against other leaders. It's a very transparent way of doing it. Okay, to wrap up our time today, I want to just very briefly share with you a few trends. And if you haven't seen, for example, on our portal, we have this year a Future of Work Reinvented resource portal. And because COVID really shattered our assumptions about work. And what we see here is that on each of this Future of Work wheel, on the portal, you can click in and get different resources and information about that on there. And then the last page that I want to show is every year we do a lot of research within Gartner, many different studies and articles and insights, but we always have a few that we really double down, and these are kind of the 6 to 8 month research studies that we put a lot of resources against. And these are the two that we're planning to do for 2022. They'll be out in early 2022. The first is culture in a hybrid world. There's been a lot of talk about this, about what we've lost or are losing in terms of culture because of the pandemic. But interestingly, employees largely think that culture in their experience has been better, but leadership tends to think that we've lost something. And there's a number of hypotheses we're going to test here, like, is the new hybrid future of work an inflection point in company cultures in a way we can't imagine? Is it the end of monolithic organizational cultures and the advent of more subcultures and many cultures? Second one is around the new model of leadership and really figuring out, what does good look like? What do they need to be succeeding? So that's it. We appreciate you. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Please complete the evaluation, if you will, before you sign off. Very important for us to know if we're delivering value. But again, thank you for your time. As I mentioned, we do not take lightly that you gave us 60 minutes. We'd love to speak to you more about these priorities in more detail. Talk to your account manager or your contact at Gartner. Thank you again for joining us today. The webinar you can download, and I'll leave that to Amanda if you want to explain how they can download these slides again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you as well, Ray. So just before you go, we've included some slides at the end of this presentation with relevant resources and toolkits that you can download, also including the Gartner conferences and webinars. And you can find all of this under the attachments tab. A quick reminder that this webinar has been recorded. You can watch this presentation again and find more great insights on demand at gartner.com/webinars. And finally, please select Rate This to score this presentation and make sure you click Send Rating to submit your response. Slides and all of these resources are under the Attachments tab, as I mentioned. And again, so thank you all for listening. Thanks again to Mark and Ray, and have a great day.